Cubase comes with a variety of editing tools, and they're all located at the top of the Cubase project window, and they're in this thin box, and you can see that some of the tools themselves have little cutouts underneath them, and that's because there are different modes to how the tools work, and you can choose different modes by clicking on and holding your mouse on the tool. You can also get to the tools very quickly by using the top row of number buttons on your computer keyboard, and if you ever forget what the shortcuts are, you can hover over each of those tools and it will show you. For example, the range selection tool is 2, so if I were to type 2 on my keyboard, that will select the range select tool. Or the draw tool is 8, the erase tool is 5, the split tool is 3, and so forth. And some of them don't have keyboard shortcuts for them, like the comp tool and the time warp tool. They don't have keyboard shortcuts, but you can always get to the most basic of those editing tools by using the buttons, or a lot of people, like me, come down to the event display itself and then right or control click to choose which tool I want to use. For example, we've already talked about the mute tool, so if I wanted to mute that and then quickly give it a right click to get back to the object selection tool, I can do that, but let's unmute that because there's some editing that I want to do to it. Let's talk about what each tool does. And I'm not going to get through all of these tools. These are going to be the most basic of all of the editing tools. Normally, you'd be using the object selection tool, but there's also a range select tool. With range select, what you can do is click and drag across a range of an event to delete it, per se, or if you click and drag across multiple events, you can use the delete key to create gaps in between that range selection. But I'm going to hit undo again. With the draw tool, particularly on MIDI-based events, you can draw in blank spots. Then you can come down to the editor display to draw in or add your own MIDI data to that blank event. So I'm going to undo that as well. The erase tool simply erases individual parts or layers. If you have overlaps, this will erase the cymbals, but leave the kick and snare event underneath. So I'm going to undo that as well. The split tool will split individual events into multiple different parts. And then you could use something like the erase tool to erase the events that you want to get rid of. The glue tool is kind of the antithesis of that. With glue, you can click an event and it will glue itself to the event to the right of where you click the glue tool. So that will glue those two events together. If I clicked on this, it will glue that next adjacent event to the right together. And then if I click it again, it becomes all one event again. And we've already talked about the mute tool. There is a zoom tool, so if you wanted to click and drag across, let's say, these 3 measures, then it will zoom into those 3 measures, 4 through 6. But I'm going to hit G on my computer keyboard to zoom out a little bit, and then I'll resize these events again to get them back to where I can see them a little bit better. And then another tool that I find is very useful is the play tool. With the play tool, you can use that to click on an event to audition it. So here's the string pad by itself. We're not hearing anything else right now because I haven't clicked on any other events. Or if I wanted to hear the lead synth, I can click on that. Or the bass event. Now let's change the operational mode of the Object Select tool. So I'm going to click and hold down on the Object Select tool, and I can see the 3 different modes that we have. There's normal sizing, sizing moves contents, or sizing applies time stretch. Normally you'd be in normal sizing, but if I chose resize moves contents, then you'll notice that if I clicked and dragged on that lead synth, it's actually going to be moving the notes to the right. Now, I can't necessarily do that on an audio event because, as I mentioned before, the audio event's size is determined by how long the recording was when I made that take. But I could move the contents to the left because I can make that event smaller by using that resize. And then sizing applies time stretch would actually stretch the events out over time. So when you stretch that, it will actually change the positions of the notes or the audio material underneath. That will certainly make it out of tempo with the project. But where that's very useful would be on something like this bass track, where maybe the note doesn't need to sustain for as long as it did. So I'm going to undo a couple of times here to get back, and then I'm going to choose my split tool to split that right at measure 7, and then when I switch back to the object selection tool in time stretch mode, I can stretch that note out if I hold down the control or command key to make the note shorter. So now when that plays back, I'm just going to solo this, the note is not going to be nearly as long. And you heard that little pop in there, which would require a crossfade, and I'll talk about crossfades in our audio editing section. But it's also a really good idea to check what mode your object selection tool is in, because if you start to resize things with the time stretching on, it can really throw you for a loop. So make sure that you always have normal sizing selected if you're not using any of those other modes for the object selection tool. And next I'll show you duplicating events.